Good morning. It is just after 9:30 on April 18th. We're here as the Planning, Housing, and Parks Committee. We have a robust agenda today with 6 items, beginning with operating budget review, starting with the Office of Zoning and Administrative Hearings. We will call them up, please, and turn it over to council staff to walk us through the packet. Mr. Anmeyer.
Good morning, Chair Friedson. Good morning, council members. For the FY25 operating budget for the Office of Zoning and Administrative Hearings, or OZA, the county executive recommends a total of $814,477, which is an increase of roughly $58,000 or 7.74% from the FY24 approved operating budget. As the committee will see, OZA has also submitted a memo to the committee requesting the consideration of an additional $5,000 to the office's legal services budget in light of emerging needs. So I'll go through this in a little more detail, but I'll say at the top, council staff recommends approval of the budget as recommended by the executive, and if the committee would like to consider that additional $5,000, that would be placed on the new and enhanced programs list. Moving on to page 2 of your packet, the committee is familiar with the important work that OZA does. As a staffing note, as the committee is also aware, Ms. Hannon, the director of OZA, will be retiring at the end of this month, and the council has appointed Ms. Byrne as her successor. The office is currently in the process of hiring for the hearing examiner vacancy that was created by Ms. Byrne's appointment to director. Again, the director of OZA sent a memo earlier this month to the committee requesting that additional $5,000 for contract legal services due to additional needs regarding the impending vacancy, as well as increased workload and increased cases that emerged subsequent to the budget submission process for FY25. And then the final item, just for the committee's information, regards the operating budget equity tool rating. The Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice issued OZA a rating of 5 out of 11 on the OBET, indicating a commitment to racial equity and social justice, and ORESJ's justification is provided in the packet. OZA has also provided a memo that is attached to your staff report detailing the extensive work that their office has done to address the comments that ORESJ has identified. They've done significant research into ways to be able to identify the next steps that ORESJ recommended in ways that are consistent with the quasi-judicial nature of the office and its duties. So the only other thing I will mention regarding that is at the Government Operations and Fiscal Policy Committee on April 11th, the Ethics Commission indicated that there were some preliminary conversations with the Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice about potentially waiving or otherwise exempting them from certain elements that build into the OBIT. It's my understanding these are preliminary conversations, but to the extent that the Ethics Commission or similar offices would be exempted from certain requirements due to characteristics that they share with offices like OZA, council staff would recommend that in the future and going forward, if and when these are implemented, that's something that is applied consistently across all offices. So again, going back to the overall budget, council staff recommends approval with the recommendation that if the committee would like to consider that additional $5,000, that would be added to the new and enhanced programs list.
Thank you for that. I'll start where you finished. So as the member here who also serves in the Government Operations and Fiscal Policy Committee, this is an important issue that we're still grappling through and working through, this balance of commitment to racial equity and social justice, which has become foundational to the work that we do, with the impartiality required of quasi-judicial bodies. Part of racial equity and social justice work is intentionality. It is literally not being impartial, being partial to the data and to the realities that we face, but that presents issues as we are trying to find these balances with particular departments. So that has been part of the conversation at the GO committee, as you know, to make sure that this is a consistent approach for quasi-judicial bodies, which may need to be treated differently than county government departments. Not to say that the racial equity social justice work isn't important, but it may need to happen from other entities, not the quasi-judicial body, for instance, related to surveying and other aspects in order to maintain that level of impartiality, which is critical. So appreciate that. I appreciate the subsequent memo that was sent to the committee and to the President, Vice President, but shared with the committee and your continued effort to try to find that right balance to work collaboratively with the Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice. But obviously, we have work to do to figure out how to strike that right balance. Let me first just say congratulations to our outgoing, welcome to our incoming. We're very excited. We wish you well. I want to extend my personal appreciation for the work of the office, not just with all of the efforts that you do on a day-to-day basis, serving our residents and our businesses, but also the work that you've done helping to advise us on some legislative initiatives that we've undertaken to try to improve processes to make it easier to go through the conditional use process, for instance, which we've worked hard on over the last couple of years. So thank you for that, and thank you for all of your service. We wish you well in your retirement and hope that you are no stranger here.
Thank you very much, and it has been a true pleasure to serve. It really has, especially under this committee, but also under this council, who really intends, whether they disagree, but intends to do the right thing.
Appreciate that, and welcome to Ms. Byrne, and congratulations, and look forward to your service. Continued service, I should say, but in this expanded role.
Thank you. I'm excited to move into the director position. Lynn's left us in really great shape. I have big shoes to fill.
Appreciate that. With that, I'm supportive of the $5,000 enhancement to the new and enhanced programs list. It seems that colleagues are universally in agreement that we will add that to the list. It will have to compete against the other items. Hopefully, given its small nature, we'll put this into the Board of Appeals chairs category from years past. But I think it's important to make sure that we continue the work and continue the progress that you have made. So with that, we'll approve the budget. We'll add the request to the new and enhanced programs list, and we will say our thanks once again for your service.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay. We are going to move on to item number 2, speaking of Board of Appeals, to the Board of Appeals. And welcome them up. See Chair Pentecost and Ms. Jay. And I will turn it over to council staff to walk us through the packet, and then we'll turn it to the Board of Appeals.
For the Board of Appeals, the county executive recommends a total of $581,642 for FY25. That's a decrease of about $63,000 or 9.8% from the FY24 approved operating budget. That comes from the shift of the funding for the half-time county attorney that is assigned to the board from the Board of Appeals budget over to the Office of the County Attorney budget. The Board of Appeals has submitted a memo to the committee requesting that the committee consider adding an additional $7,000 to the board budget to address an anticipated shortfall that was identified subsequent to the FY25 budget submission. Council staff does recommend approval of the budget, and if the committee would like to consider adding that $7,000, that will be placed on the new and enhanced programs list. Just to go into a little more detail about some of these items, beginning with the shift of the attorney charge back to OCA. Again, that's $102,600 from the Board of Appeals budget to the Office of the County Attorney budget. OCA has indicated that this mitigates an administrative burden and will entail no impact on services for the board or for the other departments that are affected by this shift. Would result in a reduction of half FTE from the board budget, and the GO committee approved the corresponding increase to OCA's budget at its work session on April 11th. Regarding the additional funding request, the board's memo to the PHP committee is attached at Circle 4, and this would add an additional $7,000 to address a shortfall identified subsequent to the submission of the budget with regards to the fact that the board stipends are not centrally loaded into the budget tool in the same way that other personnel costs are, even as the board stipends have continued to increase year over year. And then regarding the operating budget equity tool rating, much the same as the Office of Zoning and Administrative Hearings, ORESJ issued the board a rating of 4 out of 11, indicating an emerging commitment. The board has also submitted a memo in support of OZA's memo outlining potential next steps for OZA and the board to implement or recommend the council implement in order to address some of the recommendations from ORESJ. And again, to the extent that any changes are made to some of these smaller offices and that those are applicable to OZA and the Board of Appeals, council staff would encourage that those are implemented consistently. So again, council staff recommends approval as recommended by the executive, with the possible addition of that $7,000 if the committee would like to the new and enhanced programs list.
Thank you. Thank you for your service. I will turn it to you to see if you have any comments, or if you just wanted to speak to the $7,000 of what the costs were. Obviously not a huge amount of money, but just curious what the cost overrun based on the budget submission was and what was found.
Sure. Thank you very much. Thank you for having us here. I do have the chair sitting next to me. It's really just it's a minor oversight in the budgeting costs for the board member stipends. The board member stipends increase by 50% of the consumer price index every December. And we submit an FFI every year estimating that cost increase. But unfortunately, it seems that and I take partial responsibility for this. Unlike other personnel costs, the board's stipend money is not centrally loaded by OHR. So, so we have a level that is set really at our 2020 level, and yet every December the board member stipends have been increasing. So the board has thankfully been able to cover this gap in years past with excess operating money. We always try to keep a cushion in our operating money because we never know what kind of cases are going to come through the door and how much in the way of board resources, operating resources, those are going to consume. And we have noted this shortfall in personnel expenses on our quarterly analysis that we have submitted to OMB repeatedly over the past few years, but no one has come forward and identified this. And I don't say this to throw OMB under the bus. We get a new OMB analyst almost every year. I say this only because it's not a new thing in going through the budget this year. Finally, I was going through it with a fine-tooth comb to find a different $5,000 shortfall, and I was like, oh my goodness, this number's stuck in the 80s. Well, it's really stuck in the 2020s, but it needs to be updated. It's a one-time thing. We're aware of it now. We know they need to be manually loaded. And it may be of no consequence. We may have the operating money to cover it, but I don't want to be coming hat in hand at the end of the year on the reconciliation list. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, well, so it's a little bit of an interesting dynamic here. I mean, it's not a lot of money, but a personnel cost issue really wouldn't be a new and enhanced program. We tried to adjust the reconciliation list to differentiate between contractual obligations, legally required. This is a legally required increase of 50% of the CPI, so I'm inclined to approve it, recommend that we approve it as part of the budget, since it is a legally required increase that was just a mistake, it seems like to me. Is that, would you agree?
Hi, Rich Harris, Office of Management and Budget. Yeah, we don't have any issue with or any concern with adding that money in the way you're proposing. The amount that's in the budget for board member stipends is low compared to what they'll have to pay to them.
And if we do that, will that address the issue moving forward? I mean, my goal here is not to add it to a list in the budget and then to get the same submission next year and then go through this dynamic every year, and 7,000 turns to 8,000 and 8,000 turns to 9,000, and then before we know it, it's still not a whole lot of money in the scheme of a $7.1 billion budget, but it just gets to be unnecessarily, it puts us in a position that we shouldn't be in.
So what's in the memo that they've requested will bring them up to where they are now, but in subsequent years, each year they'll still have to go in, like the director had said, and make a manual change for that year's marginal increase, which everyone is aware needs to be done now, whereas previously it was not aware.
All right, so if we
But
fix
just
this
do them up to
aspect
now
of
and
it,
then
are you confident that the rest of it will be addressed moving forward?
It should be, yeah. This will trim them up to where they are now, and we know in subsequent years what needs to be done to keep them there.
Okay, all right, so that would be the recommendation. So I'm going to turn it to Councilmember Joanna.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's reasonable as long as we can figure it out going forward. Just on the Res J stuff, which, and I know we talked about this a little bit, the chair did in the previous conversation, you all are in a similar situation with the quasi-judicial nature. I appreciate the willingness to want to do as much as you can. It's mentioned in this memo around the Ethics Commission requesting like an exemption, and that if they exempt, maybe you'd be exempt. I just want to say I don't think that's the way to go. I think there's ways to achieve racial equity and social justice within judicial and quasi-judicial systems. By all, it doesn't have to be exactly the way everyone else does it in the other departments. So I just wanted to hear what your thoughts on that. Do you agree? And then obviously, and then there was some mention of the core participation. I know you're a small office, so but if you could address that a little bit.
Thank you. And first of all, I will say that our office is fully committed to advancing racial equity and social justice and to doing as much as we can, certainly within our very small and limited staff. Quasi-judicial decision makers and their staff are not permitted to inquire about the race or ethnicity of persons appearing before them, and that's consistent with the Maryland Rules of Judicial Conduct. And for that reason, Ms. Robeson-Hannon in her memo and me in the memo that I sent echoing that have suggested that third parties collect racial and ethnic data about the persons who appear before us and their perception of access and their perception of fairness in the decisions that we issue. We have worked and met recently with Mr. Anbinder and Ms. Singleton, things that we could do to improve our OVET scoring, such as I think we've received approval to designate one of our staff persons to participate on the council's core team. As an office with 3 people, we're not required to have a core team ourselves, and I was a little bit surprised to see that we were dinged for not having a core team. You talk about the Racial Equity Action Plan. I believe that's what Ethics has asked to be exempt from. We haven't prepared ours yet. I don't think it's due until 25, but again,
The plan.
From the action
Yeah.
plan requirements.
Thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, the plan. Yeah.
but I think that's the only thing they've asked to be exempt
Yes.
from.
Right.
And I guess all I could say in speaking to that was that, this is a single statute and there has to be some leeway for agencies that can't comply with the letter of the law to find another way to
Agreed, yeah.
reach compliance. And with respect to the collection of data, we had reached out to the Office of the County Attorney to say, we can't collect this data, we're prohibited by the Code of Judicial Conduct, what are we supposed to do? And the answer was, the law says you have to collect this data, which we didn't do because, but we're kind of hamstrung in that regard. So we were looking for ways to move forward. I know that Ethics has suggested that this might be one way. We would certainly be open to it, but it certainly wouldn't be that we're seeking to evade this responsibility.
Right.
We're really looking for another way to accomplish it.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. Thank you. And that's what I wanted to allow you to articulate. And we want to work with you to help you meet the requirements. So I think the ideas that were mentioned of having one of your staff members participate with the council team, and I think this is something we can come back to outside of budget, but I just wanted to say on the record and to you that, even if it's a limited plan, there should be a way for you to comply, and there is without, and maybe we need to adjust the laws a bit for your agencies. But I do think, the intent is there, and there are ways. We've worked a lot, for example, different, but with the state's attorney's office and other judicial, they have different requirements, right? Where their data data requirements are a little different. They do tend to collect more data. It's not always clear, but we've been working with them to try to clear that up and so it can be looked at holistically. So I appreciate your response and just wanted to flag it as something that I think there is a way for you to comply, and we want to work with you to make that happen.
We'd be happy to work with you, and thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, and I appreciate that you're working with Selena Singleton and the council team, and I do think that there perhaps are opportunities not only to be consistent across the board with ethics and other quasi-judicial entities, which is important. I think that should be figured out and handled consistently across county government. I also think figuring out how to include the legislative branch quasi-judicial bodies, the two that we have today, Merit System Protection Board, into the council as a legislative branch, perhaps would be a path forward and would allow you to follow through with your legal obligation to follow, the standards of, judicial proceedings as stipulated under state law and judicial standards. So, it's a work in progress. It's we've talked about these efforts as a continued commitment, not a finite set of rules and policies, but continued work. And this reflects the fact that we still have work to do. With that, if there's agreement from the committee, we're going to include the additional personnel costs into the budget and not include in the new and enhanced program list since it's personnel and legally required, and we'll send that recommendation to the full council. Thank you.
Thank you
Appreciate it,
very
Mr.
much.
Chair, Madam Executive Director.
This memo's to the Public Safety Committee. Wrong template.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, we're going to move on to Mr. Mia and call up Department of Housing and Community Affairs. We're going to start with the executive regulation for townhouse rent rates for moderately priced housing and HIF payments for developments of 11 to 19 units. And with that, as our colleagues in Department of Housing and Community Affairs are coming up to the table, I will ask Mr. Mia to walk us through the packet.
Good morning. Okay, first item up for DHCA today is indeed the Executive Regulation 11-23. This has been submitted by the executive under the Method 1 process of regulatory review, so it does require an explicit council approval or disapproval. It's not a particularly technical, or it's not a particularly complex regulation. What it does is it clarifies the rent rate for townhomes that are in the MPDU program. It provides a basis on which to calculate payments due to the HIF for small developments, and establishes a process to collect such payments, and then make some stylistic changes to the regulation to be more consistent with other MPD regulations. The staff's concern or will note that it does require some additional processes for small developers of such developments, and in exchange for those additional processes, DHCA is receiving enhanced notice of these payments. Ms. Cross has developed a PowerPoint presentation to walk you through some of the more background and history of this regulation. Happy to defer to her at this point, or we can answer any questions.
Happy to defer. Let's go through the presentation if that's okay with the director.
Good morning, Summer Cross, Chief of Housing for DHCA, and I hope you enjoyed this slight budget relief and talk about something else for a second. Today we're going to talk about Executive Regulation 1123.
Only if the county council would there be joy in the relief from budget conversations to move to an executive regulation.
Exactly. Actually, sorry, Naeem, could you go to the next slide? Thank you. So just to set the stage, the reason why we're talking about this regulation today is because we're seeing 2 times as many rental units created in 2023 than 2022. 90% of all new units in 2023 were rental, and we are expecting about 84% of new units under construction as rental. Thanks. So the purpose of this regulation is to get ahead of that. We noticed that there are some gaps currently in our MPDU regulations related to rentals, and we're trying to address that before we get an application that would require this. So the Executive Regulation 1123 will set a rent rate for MPDU townhomes, set a calculation method for rental buildings that require a HIF payment. Those are buildings of 11 or to 19 units. We're going to clarify the process of how to collect those payments, and because we have such wonderful staff at OCA, they noticed some formatting changes, some punctuation, capitalization that was not quite consistent with the rest of the regulations, so they went ahead and took the opportunity to clean that up. So the first recommendation is to set a rent rate for MPDUs. Currently, our regulations only address garden apartment and high-rise MPDU rent rates. This chart is actually what we publish on our website, showing all new developments, what the rent rates would be for 2024. It is calculated based on a set formula that's in our regulations and based on 65% of the area median income, or AMI, for garden apartments and 70% for high-rise. What we're proposing is that townhomes reflect the garden rent rates of 65% of AMI, and because townhomes under our code are required to have 3 bedrooms, we're really only talking about one set number, and that would be for 2024, $2,180 for rent for a townhome. We currently have 2 communities being developed with MPDUs that we know or believe will be rental townhomes. One is actually under construction and hopefully coming to us for an offering agreement this summer. So again, we're trying to get ahead of this and try to establish a rent rate before they come to us. The rent rate would apply to a vertical or horizontal orientation of the townhomes too. The second request in this regulation is to establish a rent rate collection, excuse me, a number to be collected for for new rentals that have 11 to 19 units. So in 2018, the law changed and added this provision to section 25A5, excuse me, that will require a payment for developments just under the MPDU threshold, so 11 to 19 units. It was very, very clear that the regulations set up how much it should be collected for sales, but is completely silent as to rentals. So what we have done is set a valuation for HIF payments of rental buildings. It would do a number of things. Next. We're trying to base it on a similar valuation for sales value to be 0.5% of the valuation of the unit. And we're also going to clarify what would happen if we have a standalone development of 11 to 19 units, or if 11 to 19 units are being added to an existing building. Okay, so this is very complicated, but essentially we considered a number of options of how to set that rent value. It's different than a sales project because we don't have an individual per unit valuation. We considered appraisals, a couple other options, and basically we came up with the idea that we would base it on the similar valuation of a sales unit. So working with Park and Planning, we have looked at the sales price, the average sales price of condos in Montgomery County over the past 5 years, and determined that the average valuation of a sales price of condos is a little over $1 million. What we are proposing for the rent rate is, again, 0.5 of that average sales price. Because we don't have a lot of condo sales, we figured a 5-year average is the best way to set that as an even price. 1 year could skew the numbers a little too much, so we would value it on the past 5 years. To make this as clear and easy as possible for developers, we will post that number on our website so everybody will understand exactly what that valuation would be. Then we have a slight variation on this in that if we have a project that is adding 11 to 19 units, they could be building up, building out, possibly converting existing commercial space to rental units. We would like to consider that as part of the whole project. So in other words, we would consider those additions for rentals as part of the total unit count and then apply the MPDU requirement to the whole project. So with that, again, if it's a new building, standing alone, 11 to 19 units would be a HIF payment. New construction that is added would apply the requirement. In conversations with developers, we agree that we could designate an existing market rate unit as an MPDU going forward and allow some of the new units to be market rate, but then distribute the MPDUs. It's all subject to the director's decision of distribution. And then finally, we'd like to clarify the process to ensure that the value is collected. Right now, what happens is these projects that are 11 to 19 units would go to Park and Planning for site plan approval and then go directly to DPS. This would require the applicant to come to a DHCA so that we have an agreement in place. We can acknowledge that the applicant knows that this payment is required and establishes that process of when we will be able to collect the payments. For sales units, we would like to also require that a covenant be recorded on the property so that the title company would catch the fact that this payment is made to DHCA before closing and make sure that, again, we're receiving that payment instead of having to go after them later. You might be asking, since this law came into effect in 2018, why are we only talking about this now, 6 years later? The reason is that this provision actually included one of the longest grandfathering provisions I've ever seen and allowed for any application that was already in the pipeline or any initial application, say for a sketch plan, to continue through the progression of other plans at Park and Planning and be grandfathered and not have to apply this. So with that, we had one project we were tracking that never actually got developed, and now we have one project at site plan that will apply. So finally, we do have projects that will apply. Any questions?
Thank you. So just if we can kind of synthesize this down, appreciate all the work that has gone into it. One, what, if any, feedback have you received on this
Sure.
regulation?
We had an initial regulation published last September. I received one comment from a land use attorney, and we actually worked out and made some adjustments to have that additional 11 to 19 units added into a building and changed that language based on our conversations. And since then, I've not received any other comments with the new publication, which was published again in December.
And when you say 11 to 19 units, what encompasses that? Like if there's a multi-phase project, like at what point is it the same site plan? Is it has to be the same building? It has to be
Same site plan.
same site plan. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and then let's break down, like, what does this actually mean in reality? So, average unit, like, what is the payment into the HIF? Like, what are we talking about here?
Based on the numbers we've calculated for 11 to 19 units, and again, we're just talking isolated only 11 to 19 units, anything else would have an MPDU requirement and build the MPDUs on site. We're looking at because the regulations clearly say 0.5% of the sales price, about $5,000 a unit. So 5,000 times
Right.
11.
Got it. So $55,000, give or take.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, and then you're going to take the 5-year running average of the average condo
Correct.
sales price, and that's all condos.
Yes.
Average condos. So studio condo and 3-bedroom condo, it's just the condo sales price.
Yes, because we don't have an equivalent square footage or bedroom size to the units that are being offered. We feel like this was the best holistic approach.
Sure, got it. And then is there an option to do MPDUs instead,
Yes.
in lieu of? Okay, that's what I thought, okay. All right, any comments from colleagues?
Sounds good.
Straightforward.
All right, appreciate it. I think we're good here and appreciate all the work.
Okay, the next 3 items, items 4, 5, and 6, are all DHCA's operating budget, including the grant fund, the general fund, and the HIF. We also have some CIP items that either the executive has submitted as amendments, or that the council committee has reviewed in February 26th, but has not voted on. So I'll cover item 4 first, which is the DHCA operating budget for their general fund and grant fund. DHCA has brought a presentation to cover all of these items, but I just want to set the stage for the general fund, which is where most of the substantive changes are happening in this year's budget. If you look on items 4, page number 2 on the table, section 1, you'll see the increases in all of the 3 funds for their operating budget. The general fund has a $3.4 million increase for FY25. That is a 32.6% increase over FY24 approved, and that is being driven by 3 factors. One, we have a planned reorganizational restructuring of the department to essentially accommodate the new programs such as rent stabilization and short-term rental inspections. We have program enhancements for existing programs that are being proposed to increase the efficacy of those programs. And finally, we have, again, the rent stabilization and short-term rental inspection mandates that the council has approved earlier this fiscal year that's being reflected in FY25 budget, namely 14 positions for those 2 programs. I'll stop there, and Director Bruton can begin his presentation, and then we can dive deeper.
Oh, I'll say, just to clarify, we are, the package you have in front of you is not a formal presentation. We want to respect your time and patience. What it is, as we go through the questions you may have, we put this together as supplementary material that we can refer to for greater detail. And the same with the organizational structure. It's always easier to see it visually than to try to imagine what it would look like. And so we're happy to go into any detail about any of the things we have here, but we just wanted to provide supplementary material to aid you in making your decisions or to aid us in making our points. We can frame it for y'all if you'd like.
It's color-coded.
Let's continue.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll start on page 3 of item 4 packet, section 2. This is a high-level summary of the staff's recommendations. On table A, staff is recommending those items totaling $924,000 to be placed on the new enhanced programs list. These are all positions, 7 positions in total, 7 FTEs, that again are strictly program enhancements that are aiding existing programs or supporting the restructuring effort. In contrast, Table B includes items that staff is recommending for approval in DHC's general fund for FY25. These, again, are the 14 positions related to the 2 bills the council has passed this year, as well as operating expenses related to IT improvements that are being driven by the new bill requirements, as well as FY25 compensation increases and FY24 compensation increases that were previously approved by the council. Those are all being recommended for approval for FY25 by staff. And then Table C briefly is the grant fund. It is effectively a same services grant fund budget. No significant changes there. So staff is recommending approval as submitted by the CE. Turning to page 6 of the packet, section 3, I think we can start talking about the proposed organizational restructuring. Essentially, DHCA is proposing to create a 4th silo, if you will, called the Rental Housing Division. It will incorporate the rent stabilization program that the council has approved the special appropriation for back in December, creating 9 new positions. Those positions have been filled as of April 8th. So those positions are ready to go. So the new division would include that program, and it would also shift the Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs to this new division as well, given their adjacencies and connections for rental housing. Beyond that, Section 3 in the packet also covers the other enhancements for License and Registration Unit, for the ULTA office, for code inspection. So we can stop there and we can leave that for discussion.
Sure. Why don't we turn it over to the department and you can talk us through.
The reorganization?
Yeah.
Sure. Thanks to some of the changes made by the council in collaboration with the county executive, we have grown significantly as far as our responsibilities are. I think if I got the history correct, our department was shrinking since the Great Recession, while at the same time our responsibilities have been expanding, especially in recent years. And so as we've been adding responsibilities, we haven't necessarily been adding staff. And so that's behind the 2 reasons we have for expanding staff. One, the expanded responsibilities due to the new programs, rent stabilization, and also the transfer of the responsibility of overseeing short-term rentals, which will be transferred from Health and Human Services this summer. And so those two programs alone are resulting in 14 additional staff members. And so that's a lot to add to any particular division. On top of that, we also, as Naeem mentioned, we also are requesting the addition of six staff members to deal with the increased volume over time. And we're happy to go through all of those. I think those will probably be in a further part. And so what we, before you have the current organizational structure, which has 3 divisions under the director's office. Those are the housing or housing administration division under Ms. Cross, finance and administration under Ms. Salem, and community development under Mr. Bovell. Under housing, we have our affordable housing section, which deals with the MPDUs, single-family rehab, down payment assistance, a variety of different programs. We also have the multifamily program, which deals with loans for multifamily developments, new construction, as well as preservation, as well as neighborhood revitalization. Think facade improvement, common improvements to common ownership communities, which Mr. Stanley handles. Then under finance and administration, we currently have licensing and regulation, management services, which includes IT, grant management, which includes federal and state grants, as well as the grants that we provide to community-based organizations, and asset management. Asset management handles all of the federal, state, and local loans and compliance with federal, state, and local loans and covenants that we've provided for affordable housing or other community-related agreements. Community development, that has the Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs, common ownership communities, and the very large one, code enforcement. That's the current organizational structure. Then shifting to the other chart, what we decided to do to improve our functioning is we've brought IT under the director's office. Because IT helps every part of the department. It helps to make it centralized under there. And this past year, we had converted an existing position to a data analyst. Because that was something we have never had in the department, and given all the data we have and that is requested by government officials and the public, it's very important for us to have one. And because IT had handled our data analytics before, there was synergy in placing them together. They are placed under a new M2 position, which was transferred over from Human Resources. We were very thankful to have the transfer. Kimberly Williams did somewhat similar work, process management and analytics, business programs over at HR, and she was an excellent fit for overseeing IT and data analytics, but also process management. So, for example, because IT is heavily involved in the new rent stabilization portal and data management, she is the project manager for working with TEBS in moving that forward. So that's where we get into the process management and analytics involved in that. So again, all under the director's office. We are creating a new 4th division, which is rental housing, to try to deal with the expansion and make sure that no one division chief has so much that it's ungovernable or unmanageable. Under rental housing will be the existing Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs, or Landlord-Tenant Mediation, and the new rent stabilization program. As Naeem mentioned, there's a decent amount of synergy between the two, and if we're in looking to hire a division chief for that division, it will help it'll help align the type of experience that we need to have in one person instead of having it too disparate. Housing is being renamed as Housing Development. That's the division that's under Ms. Cross. And that will continue to have the affordable housing program and all that's under it, as well as multifamily. Their responsibilities are growing, say with the new nonprofit preservation fund, as well as we are in the midst of work on a new moderately priced senior living program, which your staffs have been, made aware of and been following, and we'll be bringing that to you probably sometime in the fall. And there are going to be some changes to MPDU, but we've also been growing with the new HEART program, and we are looking to kind of expand our work in with sort of down payment assistance and housing counseling, because we believe that there is more we can do to help foster home ownership for low and moderate income households in the county. Finance and administration, they are remaining basically the same, except that they've lost IT. And so they will continue to have licensing and registration, management services, which is basically human resources, grant management, same as before, federal, state, and local grants, and asset management, loan and covenant compliance issues. And then community development will still have code enforcement. Neighborhood revitalization is going to move back to community development. It had been there for years prior. Under the previous leadership of DHCA, it had been transferred over. And so we decided it made more sense to put it back over there under community development. And then common ownership communities will remain under there because, as we'll talk about later, if you all approve, the new troubled common ownership community revolving loan fund and the new staff member to help assist common ownership communities in governance, regulatory, and compliance issues, there is definite synergy between that role and neighborhood revitalization that has a lot of experience in helping people through rehabilitation and also has experience with helping common ownership communities through necessary infrastructure changes. And also there's another benefit in that under community development, they currently have code enforcement, common ownership communities, and rent stabilization. Those are three of our programs that have very heavy tenant interaction, and so very heavy positive and negative interactions with the community. And so dealing with quality control, dealing with community issues, it's a lot for one division chief to manage. And so Mr. Bovell, we are giving him a little break there by, like neighborhood revitalization is all about happiness and thanks, and not about, like community interaction, not as much about community interactions.
Exactly what you were talking about.
Yes, yes.
From the at large.
And so that's the overview and the rationale for our change. I didn't go into any of the particular new positions. Happy to go through that as we come to them. Happy to answer any questions you have about our rationale or the need for doing this.
Are there any questions on the overarching reorganization, restructuring? Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez?
Just, this is wonderful, by the way. At least for me, I'm a very visual person. I appreciate this. How did you manage as a team to come up with all these changes? I'm just curious.
Well,
How was that process?
I tend to like to manage collaboratively. And so we have a weekly senior staff meeting. The reorganization possibilities, we considered many different permutations of this, and we worked it through together with the senior management team, as well as getting input through the senior management team to the managers, the M3s of all the different programs. And we tried to consider both our intended the intended consequences we wanted to have through the different options, but also to consider what might be some unintended consequences if we did certain things. And we also wanted to make sure that there wasn't, for example, community development had so many more staff members, and that is just a lot, to manage effectively, because you may only have a few direct reports to you, but when you're dealing with quality control, labor management issues, and community feedback issues, and you're dealing with 70-some people, that's a lot. And so, we're trying to equitably distribute the responsibilities within the department to make us more effective and efficient.
That's great, and I know we're going to talk about this later, but let me just say now, on the common ownership communities section, very excited about it. I've been hearing, I will say for this year in particular, pretty much an increased number of folks from condominiums in my districts looking for help. There's one huge one in my district that I'm gonna, at some point offline, I'm gonna talk to you about the issues that are happening there. And this is so needed, and I'm glad we're moving forward. That's all.
Yeah, and just to say, and we'll probably talk about this later with the new Common Ownership Communities program, where common ownership communities can be in varying degrees of distress or trouble. And we do not want to make interaction with us on that level something stigmatizing. And so we're going to think very carefully about the name, and it'll be about COC assistance at a variety of levels, which augments the existing training and compliance that we're responsible for.
Yeah, I agree. Common ownership communities support, common ownership communities assistance. The one person's troubled is another person's challenge, but opportunity as well. So,
We don't want to affect anybody's property.
yeah, and there's a lot of sensitivity, and I would say, at least in my prior District 1 representation, it's slightly changed since several of the older condos are now in Kate Stewart's district. I still have some, but they've been split a bit. But I have, over the course of the last 6 years, represented some of the oldest common ownership communities that face some of the biggest challenges, but also represent some of the most important affordable home ownership opportunities in the county. And we have to figure out how to find that right balance between ensuring that we protect these at-risk common ownership communities that represent some of our most important affordable home ownership opportunities, with the need to make sure that they are properly governed, that they meet code, that they are set up in the way that they should be financially, and that they're providing the type of quality of life and safety that they ought to. That's easier said than done, and I have said before, I have great respect for anybody who serves in a common ownership community board, like Director Bruton has in his life and in his extracurricular activities, I should say. And I have said before, I'll say again, I don't have the political skills or the stomach to serve on my common ownership community board. I ran for county council instead. It's much safer politics, it seems. But let me turn it over to Councilmember Jawando.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you. Thank you for submitting this, and thank you for having the team here, as well as OMB. And then you have one chair for the rent stabilization person.
We'll be calling anybody up that you.
Yes, team back there too, but I meant the directors here, and it's like kind of ominous there.
Yeah.
It'll be filled. What's the timeline? Have you advertised for that? And
We have to follow the rules. Can't create a position or advertise it.
So you have it.
until it's created. But as soon as you vote on the budget, we'll be like knocking on OMB's door and asking for it to be created, and then knocking on HR's door and moving expeditiously. If you all deign to approve it.
And you've hired the other. I know, like when we approved the other positions for rent stabilization, even before that, you had started to work on the descriptions and all that stuff. So you're ready. You got that going. Okay. And on the IT switch from Ms. Salem, that I think has been here for quite a while and done a great job. So that will report directly to you or the deputy director, and still provide obviously support for everybody. And how do you see that shaking out?
Yeah, so Ms. Williams, who has joined us, has been an amazing addition. She's one of the folks who was essential in helping us hire, the 9 rent stabilization folks within March, except for 2 we let go a little long because they had, other responsibilities. And she's been amazing at organizing and with TEBS the IT work to enable rent stabilization. And she's kind of transforming the IT, and with the additional IT staff, now we'll have more than one coder for a very coding and IT dependent department, and it's great because many people think of IT just as a support service. They are not just a support service to us. They, they are an integral part of all of our operations, and, very essential to our effectiveness. And, we're treating them with the additional importance, and the additional staffing has been great. And then already, Esther Devani, who transferred over from the police department to be our data analyst, who's, in IT, effectively, she has already been really helpful with helping us clean data to prepare for the rent stabilization portal, as well as helping us organize a lot of data. I think I've said before that DHCA in the past has not been the best with managing our data. There is, as with the the Washington Post report that came out about housing, and the annual hand surveys about how much work's being done, and we, as with when I was working in the district, working with the district government, they had lots of problems with management of their housing related data, and it's something prevalent all across the country, and we are taking it very seriously. We're unifying our databases so they won't be siloed anymore. It'll help us to be much more responsive. It'll help us to help inform elected leaders so you can make more informed decisions about what's going on. We'll be able to tell you within a year how many affordable housing units we have, where they are with the new rent stabilization, and the new way we're doing the portal. We'll also have better data as far as the annual data that we have to require from the survey. And so we will probably, better than any place in the country, have an existing snapshot of all rental housing rates and be able to track those over time, whereas most jurisdictions rely on commercially available data, that really only tracks Class A, B, and some C. They don't really get to lower than that, and they don't get to
Great.
small units.
So Ms. Williams is the manager?
Yes, she's the M2.
Okay, M2. Hi, good to see you again. And then, obviously, people will be assigned to support the various divisions. Is that how it'll be broke down? That's how it's broken down now, I think, right? Okay, great, and that'll continue.
Yes.
Great, that's awesome. And then just last question, the 133, so if everything's approved, I think I saw it would go to 133. What FTEs total for the department, and what are you at now?
Assuming, sorry, right now we have 122 because we still have 5 additional short-term rental position that still need to be added. So if that's approved, assuming by FY24, then we have 127, and then with additional position that have been approved, we have 133 altogether.
So the additional positions is 6 additional positions from what you already are approved?
Yeah, and we also abolished 2 vacant unfunded position
I saw
because
that.
it's been vacant for a long time. So we made decision and, just try to be a 9-hour operation with the reality. So we move forward with abolishing that 2 vacant unfunded position.
Got it. Thank you. That's helpful. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, just walk through that again. I just think it was confusing for everybody to understand, so I just want to make sure for the public. So 133 positions would be what you're requesting in this budget. Your FY24 approved was 122, but there were additional positions subsequent to that. Could you just explain the breakdown?
Right now, it's 122, which include that 9 position recently approved by the council for rent stabilization. And we still have 5 additional positions associated with the short-term rental that needs to be hired to bring on board in order to carry out the implementation of the law being passed. So 122 plus 5 will be 127, and then plus additional position.
11 new. 11 new positions, 5 of which are for the short-term rentals.
Correct.
You know, the interesting dynamic there, just to be very clear, is all we did was change the responsibility from one department to another. In theory, there should have been no net increase to the number of positions, but there were no positions associated with actually following through on regulating those issues. I just think that's an important point, because for most people, that would be very confusing as to why we had to add, and you're suggesting that we add 5 positions simply because we're moving from one department to another. One would assume that those positions would move from one department to another. In reality, there were no positions to move because we didn't have anybody in county government, apparently, that was responsible for that. So I just thought it's important to make that clear.
Would you like me to go through the 5 or not?
Sure, we can do that now, or do you want to wait till we go through positions?
So I think we could continue talking about position requests, and then we can turn to the fee part and the revenue part of this.
Yeah, why don't we do that? Because I do think we have to differentiate between new and enhanced programs list as well in terms of new positions versus, you know, that is a differentiation here and something that we did change. I think is important of, you know, fulfilling approved laws versus, you know, new position requests to align with departmental priorities. Important, but, you know, those are 2 different things. So why don't we go through, why don't you share with us the 5 positions to start of what those positions will do, and then we can move on to the new positions, you know, you're requesting, make sure that they're, you know, see where colleagues are, and, you know, I think those will be treated potentially, if, you know, based on the, you know, staff recommendation and the interest of colleagues, as, you know, different categories of positions. Since, you know, one is more aligned with the rent stabilization positions that were added mid-year, similar to that, and the others are new position requests based on changes within the department.
Correct. So for short-term rentals, as you were saying, it has been with HHS since its inception. They have 1/2 of one person assigned to it. That person is also responsible for things to deal with hotels and a variety of other things. So overburdened as is without the half that's supposed to be on short-term rental. Part of the reason that short-term rental was transferred to us is that HHS had not been able to adequately enforce the law because of the lack of staffing. And so when we did the fiscal impact statement, when the council and the county executive were considering making this shift, we had the benefit of some of the data from HHS, and we determined that we needed 5 positions. Those 5 positions break down into 2 licensing positions. There are currently estimated to be approximately 1,300 short-term rentals. There are less than 100 that are registered, and so that are licensed. So that is a huge amount difference that we need to make up. And so those 2 licensing folks will be responsible for tracking down, dealing with, and bringing into compliance the 1,300 plus short-term rentals. And as you all probably know, those fluctuate over time. People decide, I'm not going to rent it anymore. I am going to rent it. People come into the business, go out of the business, and so it's constantly fluctuating. Which brings us to our next position, which is an IT specialist. The purpose of the IT specialist is to deal with the contracted data provider. There is a third-party data contract. This data provider, for lack of a better phrase, effectively scrapes data from the short-term rental websites. There are several of them. And so they pull the data on, where are these places? Like, what are all the places, like from rooms in a house to entire houses or apartments that are being rented. They then put that data into a manageable form. It will go to this IT specialist. The IT specialist will assist the licensing folks in identifying and getting the information, requests for licensing, perhaps notices of violation and citations if people don't comply. And so there's a heavy data component because it is such a fluctuating part of the rental market that you effectively have to, use this data scraping service to find what's out there.
The only bad thing about, not bad, but the only challenge about that process is that this IT person cannot go to the Safeway in the Giant and all the bodegas in the neighborhood to see the listings on the walls, because, that's another situation that is happening.
Yeah.
And
We figured, we'll have to do this iteratively, because the vast majority are not registered and licensed. We will start with those, and then after we master that, move on to those that are not as publicly obvious. And then the final two positions are code enforcement inspectors. Every single one of these, and I don't know if any of them have been inspected. Every single one of these 1,300 plus has to be inspected. And every new short-term rental has to be inspected to make sure they meet the code and regulatory requirements that were passed by the council years ago.
exactly. And the reason why I'm saying this is because some of these ones that you don't see online are the worst. And it's a problem for everyone, and it's just not safe for people. Folks living in basements, and I know this after door knocking during my campaign, folks living in basements with no windows or not way to escape if there's an emergency, and it's just bad. It shows the need of creating more housing, affordable housing, but you cannot just avoid looking at the reality. You go to a bus shelter in many of our communities, and you see the listings on the bus shelters. So I think it's something that we need to recognize and at some point need to tackle to ensure that people are living in safe places, in healthy places. That's all.
Appreciate that. Just, Director, if you could just explain what this is going to cover and what it's not going to cover, because shared rooms within a home are not necessarily part of this regulatory
It
regime.
will,
It's for a unit,
right, it is for
short-term rental unit.
short-term rental units only. If it is run as a group house that has normal leases, that would not fall under it. It's only short-term rentals as defined in the code that regulates this.
Okay. The data person. So just explain to me, so there's a full-time person who is taking the third party who we're hiring to help us scrub the data, and then that person is going to work with
The two
the
licensing,
licensing folks.
and the code inspectors. But they will be the full-time person devoted to working with us, just because this is more tech and data heavy than any of our other enforcement.
What tech and data are they actually doing? I mean, it seems to me, I don't know, I'm like reminiscent of a TPS report in Office Space of, I'm sure this person will be a people person, but, why can't the consultant work directly with the licensing and the code enforcement? Like, why aren't they obtaining that data
So
correctly?
part of what we need to do is we need to ingest that data into our system so that we can track them on a regular basis. And so we don't just say get a spreadsheet or like a data file and then just use that weekly.
But there's no, I mean, wouldn't the third party, wouldn't part of the third party say, you'd say, this is our system, this is the format that we need the data that you're going to provide, and they could help?
Oh, yeah, so they would.
I don't know, maybe I'm crazy here, but this doesn't seem like a full-time position to me. I mean, the other positions I get. We need code enforcement. We need licensing. We've had nobody doing that work. I get it. I'm on board on that. I understand, whether we can fully catch up to all the things that we say we're going to do has always concerned me on these issues. I have mentioned that before of, potentially setting ourselves up for failure. But if we are going to say we're going to regulate these things, then we actually have to follow through and regulate them, and that requires people. So the 4 people, I get it's this one position that seems to be like a connector to ingest data from one format to another seems a little antiquated to me.
That's actually what other of our IT staff do. There is we have how many different databases? How many different main data? 10? Thank you. We have over 10 main databases, and the rest of our IT staff are all heavily involved in one, augmentation. We're always trying to improve. We're always finding bugs or problems, or say, for example, with our code enforcement database, it has gotten antiquated and there are some problems with it, and we're constantly improving the workings of it. But a lot of what they do is just the regular troubleshooting and managing of data, the like running of new and novel reports. It's like, for example, when the annual rent survey comes around, that's a significant amount of work for multiple people. It's as much as we would love to, put a data file into a computer and you would think it would do everything on its own. We don't have AI yet that's handling all of these things. And so data that the data will come in a compatible format from the contractor, but then we have to ingest it. We have to develop a new set of fields in our database to handle the different categories and classifications, because they're different than standard rentals, and then it needs to be ingested and cleaned constantly for that, because it's not like the the short-term rental databases have a standard format between each of them. And if you've ever looked on any of the short-term rental places, they don't always fill out the same information, and they don't give you the exact address.
So how much are we going to pay the third-party vendor to do the scrub that you're talking about?
So right now, the DHHS working with this, not really a third party, it's just they purchased the software that has been posted out there. So it's really don't have a specific consultant that they work with. It's just the software available for HHS to monitor how many people has post any kind of short-term rental available from the website.
So Vrbo and Airbnb allow you to purchase.
No.
Or there's another organization that then scrubs Vrbo and Airbnb and any other short-term rentals to get raw data.
Yeah, and so
you're just subscribing to whatever that is, and you can run your own reports?
Yeah, so Ms. Salem did a much better job than I in explaining this, because she used to be in charge of IT. We have the software. Our IT person, this IT specialist, would run the software and ingest the information through the software. The firm, would be there for customer support. But yeah, they're not. I misspoke. They're not pulling the data for us. Our person is using their
You're purchasing software.
Yeah, it's an annual software license.
Got it. Okay. All right. Well, that clarifies it a little bit more. All right. I still would like to see how much of a full-time position this is, but I have less heartburn with that.
If you'd like, we can have we can do like a follow-up one-pager explaining the process.
That would be great. I think it would be helpful for full council, because I think others might have the same questions that I had. When you hear, when you hear that, I think that would be helpful. Is there
Ms. Williams,
colleague in the back that wants to share?
you can put together kind of a one page of the process and how it would all work.
Yes, I can.
Great. Any other questions on
I
that?
just want to note that if the council were to regulate simply, for example, this position could also work on that inspection regime. So there's some future proofing potentially if that were to happen.
Well, I guess that's part of the question, though. I mean, from my perspective, it would be how much of a full-time position is it today if we're like expanding them into other, but at any rate, I see the point, and I'm not going to push it too hard on that, although in theory, some of the other organizational structural changes that you're making related to IT, I would think that those IT specialists could do more than one thing. I mean, in terms, the skills that would be required to do short-term rentals, you don't really need to be, an expert in licensing or code enforcement or anything else. You need to know how to run a database. And, perhaps looking at, whether 10 databases is the best model or whether we should synthesize that down to, a much smaller manageable number. And then you could have a smaller group of people who could run lots of different reports, who could be subject matter experts on a smaller number of databases and, skilled in that. But I guess that's a conversation for another day. Would love for you to come back and explain to us your plans after budget, like maybe in the fall, on the databases and how you're looking at the databases. You talked a number of those databases being antiquated, and it seems like we're adding positions and having people do a lot of busy work to complement the shortcomings that the technology has, and really thinking through what that looks like, and perhaps having TEBS participate in that as well, and understanding what new technology solutions there could and should be. We're looking at enhancements on the TEBS side of things for enterprise-wide technology solutions, and certainly with the massive increase in personnel and responsibilities that the department is undertaking, looking at some technology solutions would be helpful.
Yeah, we're collaborating with TEBS. TEBS, as far as I understand how the division in labor on IT is now, TEBS helps with enterprise level things. And so they are helping us, for example, to do the coding to create the new rental housing portal. But then the day-to-day management of the code and the data ingestion, that's all the department's responsibility. They TEBS comes in on a project-based kind of thing. They're not the kind of, they don't manage the day-to-day operations of our IT infrastructure.
Got it. Okay. Any other questions on these? Thank you. That one pager I think would be helpful to include in the packet when we submit this and recommend it to the full council. So if you can get that done in time, working with Mr. Mia, I think that would be helpful. Why don't we talk through the, sorry, yes, Councilmember Jawanda.
And then you mentioned this at the beginning, and I don't know if it's in here. If it is, just point me to it. The fact that the department had shrunk as you've increased in responsibility, and if there's some sort of, I'm looking at Pofin here, I don't know if there's a chart or graph that could reflect that. I know everyone was cut in the Great Recession, for example. It would just be helpful, I think, contextually to
like a 15-year
see.
window or 20-year window. What was it in 2009?
Yeah.
It was kind of a trigger year
Right.
in many ways.
We've seen that with other departments.
FY 09 to now.
Sure, I can work with OMB, my counterpart, and we'll put together, since 09 or 08, whatever, how the changes, personnel and all the budget issues for the department.
And since we know you're good at these large documents, so if at key points in times things happen, like you got responsibility, whatever, so I just think that's helpful to contextualize new positions in that, that way.
Even if you did like every 5 years and did like FY 00, FY 09, something like 01, 09, like every 4 year, 01, 05, 09, something like that, just to see the progression. I think we're less looking about like a point in time, year over year. I don't want to put word, but I think this is what we've looked at in other places, and more about the progression over time of what this has looked like.
No
These
problem.
are
Does that work?
responsibilities.
We
yeah.
love numbers, so we would love to put the numbers together to share with you.
Thank you.
Okay, so it seems like that is what we have on this. Let's move on to the new position requests.
So again, the new there's more detail starting on top of page 8 in the packet number 4. Council staff requested some responses on questions on what each position would do. each new non-bill related position would do. So starting with the Housing Code Inspector 3, which is line number 1 on Table A for reference, there's some detail on what that position would do. And essentially, it would enhance the existing troubled and at-risk property regulation regime, essentially improving code enforcement activities on that. I will note that code enforcement has received additional, I believe, 2 FTEs over the last several years. This would be a 3rd position being added to that function. So staff, again, on all of these enhancements, we're recommending they be put on the new enhanced programs list.
And if you'd like to just run me through the list, we can go through one by one, or if you could,
Yeah, that'd be great. Just
One by one.
Yeah, just identify the position. We'll give the department an opportunity just to explain it. We could see if there's any questions from colleagues, move on to the next one. I think that would be the easiest way to follow.
Code Inspector 3 for code enforcement.
That's a question 1 for the inspector.
Do you want me to reference the table line?
Page 8, we're going to go question by question. We'll make it nice and easy for everybody. No problem.
Housing Code Inspector 3. Okay, so we have needed to have an increase in inspectors since the passage of Bill in 1915 with the creation of the Troubled Properties Program, because we have to, on an annual, biennial, or triennial basis, inspect all properties, anything from 100% for troubled or at-risk discretionarily down to, is it 25%? Yes. Down to 25% if they have been compliant in the past. The norm is 50%. The norm is 50%. Thank you. This has made a significant increase over just complaint-based inspections, and so we have needed to ramp up to do that. To give you just a notion, for example, when we do when we do the troubled property inspection for a large building, say that has over 1,000 units or now around 1,000, we have a few of those, it takes 3 days with 20-some inspectors. And 20-some inspectors are there all day long. And so it's, a lot of work. And what we're finding is that, number one, we need more inspectors to, do this in a timely fashion. But number two, with the new provision in the rent stabilization law that bars troubled and at-risk properties from being able to increase their rents, we've been developing a revised troubled and at-risk property inspection process and proposed some regulatory changes to the existing regulations to facilitate doing that, because currently under the regulations, we can only evaluate them on an annual basis. So you're stuck for a year. And naturally, landlords, property owners do not want to be stuck for a year without being able to increase their rents. And so if they do the right thing, fix all the code violations that got them into that status, then they should be able to go ahead and increase the rents. The intent is to incentivize folks.
We want people to be able to get off the list if they're doing the right thing.
Yes.
And we want to make sure that everybody is being held accountable to ensuring that they have a safe and dignified property that's up to code, because that's someone's home. So
Absolutely. And so
appreciate that. I think we're no questions here on that. Thank you for the explanation. Let's move on.
Position number 2 is line 4 on Table A. It's listed as an investigator 3. Is actually a program manager 2 supporting the Common Ownership Community Program. This again would support the new troubled COC CIP project.
All right. So the main issue on this was that it was classified wrong in the budget submission. We're going to clean that up and include that in the budget submission. But you've explained in great detail the Common Ownership Community's efforts, and this position would be to implement those efforts. It would have to be added to the new and enhanced programs list, and we're going to clarify so it's the right classification for the type of position that it is.
Same dollars, no dollar change.
Thank you for catching that. Okay, let's move on.
Okay. Number 3 is the Program Manager 1 position to support ULTA, Landlord Tenant Mediation Office. This ULTA has currently received several investigators over the last several years. This would be providing more of the programmatic support for the office.
And actually, I'm going to ask Nicole Catravanos, because she's going to come up, because she's going to be able to do a better job while she's getting into the chair. She's done a great job of reducing the case backlog, but our number of cases per year, calls, disputes that are being mediated, cases that are being taken to COLTA are increasing, so we're trying to stay responsive and responsible in not making folks have significant delays or get in a backlog. But in addition to that, there are significant administrative responsibilities that we envision this program manager taking on that could free up some of the existing inspectors to be able to more quickly manage their cases. So, Ms. Katravanis, if you want to go ahead.
Good morning, everybody. So before I start directly on this position, I just want to acknowledge a few things in comparison to where we were last year when Ulta was in front of the commission. Sorry. Last year, we had a backlog of almost 500 complaints, 494 complaints. With the addition of an investigator that started this past fiscal year, with the approval of significant comp hours, and despite the fact that we were down one investigator the entire year, we have resolved over 70% of the backlog. My hopes is that by the end of the summer, the whole backlog will be up to date and taken care of. So just a shout out to all the investigators because they've worked a significant amount of comp time and it's been a team effort and something that
Our
long
appreciation.
required
We have-
to be done.
We have tasked you with that, and you have done a great job leading it, and thank you to your team for working hard to make it happen, because it's important.
Mike.
I don't think your mic is on.
On page 14 of the packet we handed out are some of the statistics that Ms. Katravanos was referring to.
Right.
So page 14 reflects the increase in ULTA complaints, in service requests, in cases resolved, community grants, and cases presented to the commission, just for fiscal year 22 and fiscal year 23. I can give you some back data from 21 and 22 where there were even more significant increase, which is part of what resulted in the backlog, but there were other factors as well. So we had 11% increase in ULTA cases filed. We had a 10% increase in cases resolved, an 18% increase in service requests. I want to take just a moment to discuss service requests. Service requests are requests that come either on the phone or email where landlords, tenants, individuals of the community just want information about landlord-tenant disputes, resources, legislation, how to file a complaint, et cetera. Currently, there was an 18% increase, which results in an average of 53 service requests per day that one ULTA investigator is responsible for addressing, and we're known for having a response rate of 48 hours. So this also results in many investigators having to work extra hours to ensure that we meet that 48-hour turnaround. We usually do it within 24. And as I mentioned last year, we have 2 amazing volunteers that volunteer over 8 to 10 hours a week on assisting us with service requests. So if at any point those 2 volunteers decide to stop volunteering, and one of them has been with us for 20 years, the other one has been with us for about 7 years, that is going to put us in a very, difficult predicament. And last year, or the year before that, fiscal year, one moment. So between fiscal year 21 and 22, we had a 15% increase as well in service requests. And we had a 38% increase in complaints filed between fiscal year 21 and 22. That's not reflected here, but I just wanted to kind of give you a perspective of how much the volume has increased for our office, how much the demand has increased for our services. Now, as far as this position that we're requesting, we've had 5 community grants reassigned to our office. I believe, and Ms. Poffen, you can, correct me if I'm wrong, 2 of them were previously within the department, and then we acquired the other 3 during COVID. And those were previously under the Grants Management Office, and then it was distributed within the whole department because we didn't know if it was going to be temporary or long-term. Now that they've been integrated permanently within the department, they have come under my responsibility, and that entails managing, renegotiating grants, ensuring the monthly statements, the monthly invoices are correct, and ensuring that our community partners are actually meeting their goals on the grants, and reassessing the effectiveness of those grants. That in itself is a 50% job of a full-time employee.
So explain that. So what do you mean by community grants in this case?
So we have, I believe it's HIF funding that we provide grants to CASA for litigation, that we provide to Maryland's Legal Aid for litigation, that we provide, or no, CASA's for
Legal
advocacy.
support. This is legal support.
Maryland's Legal Aid for tenants, and to LADC, to Renters Alliance, and HIP, Housing Initiative Partnership. These are organizations that we meet bi-weekly to, in addition to other organizations, to see what is going on in the landlord-tenant world and also to monitor those grants. Many times those grants have to be reassessed throughout the year for effectiveness because you start a contract, you start a grant throughout the year, and then you realize certain things are working, certain things are not. We have to reassess. That takes time. In addition to that, you have to monitor all the invoices every month. I am doing that with the assistance of somebody from code enforcement who technically it's not under their job description at this point to be doing that. So we need someone under OLTA who is not an investigator, because it would be a conflict of an interest for an investigator who's a mediator and needs to be neutral to be managing landlord-tenant grants, to manage, renegotiate those grants every single year. And it makes sense that that individual that's going to be working with advocacy organizations in the tenant community also be responsible for doing tenant and landlord outreach within the community, who we do not currently have anybody in OLTA doing right now.
And when you say assessing the effectiveness and renegotiating, the way this was supposed to work is that these grants were supposed to be moved into the base budget if the departments agreed that they were part of their core mission, which this seems appropriately part of your core mission, that you're essentially contracting out services to outside entities. But when it's in the base budget, that means it's not really supposed to be for a particular organization. It's supposed to be a contracted service like any other government service that's contracted. It just happens to be with a nonprofit. So are we, and on what basis are we putting out an RFP or doing some type of solicitation? At what period of time? Like when does that happen? Because we're still referring to them as community grants. They're really not community grants anymore. We've transitioned them literally out of the community grants NDA, moved them into the department for the purpose of viewing them more as solicitation of core services, core government services, than grants.
So if I may, what she was referring to, it was a tender services contract. And I think back in FY20, DHCA, we did go through the RFP process and to select whatever the community organization that able to provide the tenant counseling services and other related, to make additional support. And so basically, department been through that process and then select 3 or 4 entity that they're able to carry out that process. So those contractor have been through the RFP process.
I remember that. We held up the funding to determine what the use was. We asked for it to be bid out. The concern is the solicitation is not supposed to be for a lifetime. And so, this is part of the rationale of changing the way that we partner and we address some of our nonprofit funding, was to move things into the base budget where they would be held to the same scrutiny as any other core government service. So the question now becomes, what now? what's next? What is the process going to be? It's directly related, like what are the marching orders that this individual, if and when they're hired, is going to get in terms of the expectation? Is the expectation that this is the service provider in perpetuity and you work with the service provider in perpetuity to deliver the services as if they're essentially your employee? Or is the marching orders of this is a contracted service provider that you work with, and we have a regular course of business that we rebid out for these services, and those service providers can bid again, and like any other solicitation. I just it's not clear to me, and it's not clear to me that it's clear to you that there's an understanding of what that process is going to look like.
So the part of I'm happy to redo the RFP annually, biannually, triennially, whatever we are instructed to do by the council and OMB, and BOFIN lets us know. Yeah, I have no problem doing that. I was just following what the past practice was. But yeah, we're happy to do that. And then as far as the responsibility that OLTA has, they have responsibility once contract is awarded. So they manage the compliance. So they'll look at
the contract monitor. I mean, I understand the role here. I'm just pointing out that at no point here is there a plan or a process to determine whether or not contracted services are going to continue. Like, what is the date? It seems like the date is you have an annual contract that you re-sign every year, and you just assume that it's going to continue, and if the services cost more money, they come back and you get into a negotiation of, here are our cost increases, and you say, here's what you're budgeted for, and there's a little bit of a dance, but that's not really how this was supposed to work. This was supposed to be a solicitation. So I'm not suggesting we make any changes right now. I am going to suggest that the department come back to the committee with a plan for how these services are going to be handled in a competitive way on an ongoing basis. If 1 year is too limited, because to start a solicitation July 1, that takes 6 or 9 months, that may not be fair to you or to the providers. So if a 2-year contract makes more sense, something like that, I would, personally, I don't want to speak for colleagues, I would personally be comfortable with that. I would allow you all to come back to us to say, here's what we're thinking. Does this seem reasonable to you? But I do think there needs to be a plan for moving forward in terms of how this works, and that needs to be in place prior to this individual coming on board so that they understand the expectations and the providers understand the expectations and can plan for it.
So I just want to make a little bit clarification. What Ms. Kotrovina was saying, this position is needed for her program, even just for contract monitoring. It's only one small fraction of whatever currently is lacking.
Yeah, I understand.
Right.
I'm pointing out
this
the
is
broad,
not the position just
I'm pointing
for
out the
that
broader
purposes.
question because it was raised as part of this. That part of it is negotiating and discussing services, and it should only be contract monitoring, or if they're part of the solicitation evaluation committee that is set up in order to go about a solicitation, then that would be a small part of their role, but it shouldn't be on an ongoing basis discussing, negotiating. I mean, that really should not, contract monitor is a different role than that role. It all could be part of this position. So if it's okay with colleagues, I would like for us to request that they come back. We're not going to impact funding here in any way, but we do need a plan for how are these issues going to be handled, and I would yield to you on what you think a reasonable time frame is. Again, if 1 year, you had said, well, whatever the council asked for, I think it would be helpful to have input from you all of what you think would make the most sense. And, again, if 1 year works, great. If 2 years is needed, fine. But, come back to us and let us know what you're thinking and what the process will be moving forward subsequent to budget. Councilmember Dronda.
Yeah, I think, as I understand the request, appreciate you bringing it up, and it sounds like the director's willing to do it, and so, yeah, I think just come back. You need the position, we get that. Thanks for getting the backlog down and continuing to work on that. And, yeah, I was here too I remember when we passed and asked all these questions. So, yeah, it makes sense from a due diligence, to have a process in place so it's clear for us, the public, and the nonprofits who apply. Absolutely. So.
Yeah, and I appreciate, I mean, neither one of the two of you were here when we had this discussion and we moved this forward. So it's no criticism in any way. It's a reflection of what's next. You know, we move forward with this process, and I just don't, want to come up with a process for moving forward where everybody's on the same page, everyone understands, how it's going to work, and, we don't continue down this was actually temporary funding that was put forward, as the pandemic was, occurring. It started the prior year with, questions of how we were divvying out these funds for rental support, which the county executive wanted to increase significantly. And there were some questions about, how those decisions were made. And so we held that up to ask more questions. And then subsequent to that, the determination was, in light of the pandemic, with concerns less about organizing and advocacy and other issues, it was really about legal representation was really a key focus. Are we providing support, and can we leverage partnerships in order to provide support so that residents know their rights and can actually act on their rights as they face eviction and other challenges. So that, I mean, just to give you the background, that was the background. I appreciate your willingness to come forward, and it seems like we're in agreement on the committee, and we'd like your input. I mean, I don't want us to dictate to you reasonable timing. We'd like to weigh in once you tell us what you think, but I think it'd be good to hear from you subsequent to budget.
Sure. Well, yeah, what we'll do is we'll target June to get a draft plan to you. And I don't know the history behind how this happened, but the contracts are staggered. They don't all end in the same month. And so what we'll need to do is we'll need to figure out when is the best place for all the contracts to end. That'll involve some contract extensions, so they all end and start on the same month. And then once we figure that out, we can evaluate whether it's a 1, 2, or 3 year RFP process, and then how that'll work. And having them all align at the same time helps us to evaluate who can provide what services based on their past work or new actors in the field, and how we want to distribute between the different nonprofit service providers the work that the county needs to have done with tenants.
Great. Appreciate that. Okay. No other questions, I don't think, from colleagues on this. Thank you for the detailed explanation of the need for that position and all of your work and your team's work that you highlighted very well. Let's move on.
Okay, next position, starting on the bottom of page 8 of packet number 4, is a program manager 1 position to support the MPDU program. This position, as noted in the packet, would help with MPDU purchasing applications for for-sale MPDUs, as well as with training. Additionally, looking towards the future, this position could assist with the new senior affordable housing program that will be coming to the council later this year.
So I will turn to Ms. Cross.
Well, Naeem summed it up very well. Essentially, this is just to help provide additional coverage for services so that we can continue to provide good, timely responses to applicants. As you can see, we have about a quarter of a full-time employee position just reviewing applications at this point as MPDUs continue to stay in our program. We also have an increased number of MPDUs that we're constantly monitoring. As shown on the slide, the nonprofit organization Grounded Solution has done a complete USA-wide inclusionary zoning study and found that the best ratio of inclusionary units to staff is about 1 full-time employee to every 200 units. We're currently at about 1 full-time employee to almost every 1,400 units. So we just have a need to again, have continuity of services, an additional staff member.
Okay, no questions from colleagues. Thank you for that. Let's move on to our next.
Next on page 9, these two positions related to the licensing and registration unit. I've grouped them together for ease of kind of understanding the overall situation with the L&R unit. One is an M3 position, and then another one is a program specialist 2 position. There currently is no MLS management of that unit. It's being led by a program manager 2. And then the program specialist 2, this was previously requested in last year's budget by the CE. It was not funded, did not come off the rec list. So it's again being requested again in this year's budget. These are both relating to revenue collections from the rental registration fees. They also administer the rental survey, the multifamily survey, and next year there will be a single-family rental survey as well.
We're already doing, we started last year and we're doing it again this year.
Gotcha.
Any questions or comments? Anything you want to add from the department?
As Naeem alluded to, we've been having a program manager run this, and that's really above the responsibility for a program manager. All the other managers who have responsibilities of this level in the department are manager 3 level. And the workload, as I mentioned last year, we have had multiple long-term temps, which are problematic, that transgresses certain labor contracts to do things like that, and it's also kind of, not the most, not what I consider the most ethical thing to do. We're supposed to, for SPSS contractors, we're supposed to be looking at 6 months to a year, and no more than, like a year and a half extension. They're not supposed to be, like, I think the philosophy and the rules are that if it's permanent work, you should have permanent employees. And so one is to get someone, like at a experience and pay level, that, to recognize the management level of things that are doing. And the second one, the second position, which is a program specialist 2 position, is to deal with, even with our long-term temps, the significant gap between labor and need. We have to regularly have significant portions of the staff chip in to help, because the labor, especially around the annual rent survey, is so extensive. And so this is just, and this is a revenue generator. And we'll get to that when we come to the fees, because we took very seriously, Council President, what you said last year about wanting us to move more to an enterprise model and having a significant portion of our services paid for by the businesses that they are overseeing. And so part of this is not only to deal with the labor gap, but that labor gap has significant impacts on the revenue, like code mandated revenue that we're supposed to be getting that we are missing out on.
Yeah, just to be clear, I prefer you not to move more in the direction of enterprise model. I think it should be an enterprise model. I think code enforcement should be an enterprise model in DHCA. I think it would be much easier for you to be able to keep up with the needs, and I think it's much fairer to the property owners to say, the delay on troubled properties to get somebody to come out, can be resolved through fees. I just think that is a more reasonable way. I mean, that's really what a fee is supposed to do. Right now, the fee goes into the ether. It means and does nothing. That is direct to them. It goes into the general fund. So it could support some of the things that are supportive of, moving the ball forward. It might not. And the likelihood is it probably doesn't, because the number of code enforcers, 44 FTEs, is small in comparison to the, multi-billion-dollar county budget. So, I appreciate that. I will have a comment on fees in a second, but I'll hold off on that. Any comments on this in particular? No. Okay, so we will add, it seems colleagues are in agreement, the council staff recommendation to add these positions to the new and enhanced programs list as new positions. The priority, high priority, the highest possible priority. Everything's a high priority, and we'll see what high priorities get through. But appreciate the description, as you have stated. I will note, we have dramatically increased, the responsibilities and expectations, and you are dramatically increasing your staffing capacity. Okay, why don't we move on to the licensing fees?
Okay, starting on page 10, Roman numeral section 5, we talk about the fee increases that are being proposed. There's two fees that are being proposed for increase. One is the rental licensing fee, which last year, if you look at table, anyway, my apologies, it's not included in here, but last year the rental licensing fee was increased to its current rate of $52 per year for multifamily units and anywhere from $70 to $125 for single-family condos and ADUs. The department has gone back and looked at several surrounding jurisdictions and is now proposing a fee increase for this fiscal year, FY25. It's on table F. You'll see on the bottom. It's $100 per year for multifamily, almost doubling from the current 52. Single family is rising slightly to 130 from 125. Condos are rising to 73 from 70, and ADUs are rising to 125 from 122. The other fee being proposed for increase is the short-term rental registration fee. It is more than doubling, tripling almost, from $150 per year to $500 per year. That is based on essentially generating enough revenue to support the 5 new positions that are being proposed to support Bill 2223. Turning your attention to Table D, this is a history of fees being collected by DHCA in their general fund since FY22. These fees were increased for FY25. It would essentially support 93% of their general fund expenditures. Basically an additional $4.6 million versus FY24 approved. Last year in FY24 approved, the previous self-supporting number was 80.6%, and FY23 was 95%, and FY22 approved, it was 95%. So we're getting closer to being 100% self-supporting in DHC's general fund, but not quite there yet. The amount that's not being self-supported in the recommended FY25 budget is about $963,000. And again, if some of the positions in Table A that are new and enhanced were not approved, that amount would be decreased. For committee's discussion, we can discuss how the fees were developed, but essentially, council staff is recommending approval. I will say with the short-term rental registration fee, we did look at both DHCA and staff looked at some surrounding jurisdictions. It is quite high. City of Baltimore, for example, is $200 per year, $200 biennially every 2 years. Prince George's County is $150 per year. DC is $104.50 per year. I think we have some more examples in the slides here. Short-term rental, yes. So some more jurisdictions that DHCA looked at. San Francisco City is $750 per year. So that is a potential concern, is that the fee might be too high and may discourage registration, although there was expected to be increased enforcement as well. So that is a concern to flag from staff's perspective.
Well, I'll just say, I appreciate the direction that this is going in and understand the reasoning behind it. I do think it should be an enterprise fund. I think it actually should be an enterprise fund, not just symbolically seem like an enterprise fund, because it isn't an enterprise fund. And that was my suggestion last year. These are huge increases. I mean, I understand there was a lot of research occurring, but it's over a 90% increase in fees for multifamily. It's a 300% increase for short-term rentals at a time when we desperately want to get the short-term rentals in compliance. I do have a bit of heartburn of going for all of it all at once. Personally, I would put out to colleagues, if there was interest, phasing this in, these increases with the, setting the expectation that the goal would be to get to these levels, but phase it in over 2 or 3 years. I don't think this is an all or nothing decision, binary choice personally, but I yield to colleagues on that, and it's not because I don't appreciate the direction. I'd also hope that over the phase-in process, that this becomes an actual enterprise fund. And, that was my request last year. There seemed to be support and interest among colleagues and the department. And so, I really do think that, we need to be moving in that direction formally.
And OMB does agree. Anita Ayutia from OMB, DHCA and DHCA staff and OMB staff have gotten together to discuss setting up the enterprise fund, and that should be done over the summer, starting in June.
Okay, great. Well, I'm glad you're going to do that. I think it would be, to me, phasing this in, allowing that to take place, and then starting next year with an enterprise fund, to me would be, best path forward personally, but I'll yield to colleagues and see where the discussion is.
I agree with you.
Okay.
Couple questions.
Sounds good. Let me turn it to Councilmember Girondo.
It's always great when it's done before I get to say anything.
I was trying to turn to you first, to be honest.
So, I was looking at just want to allow you to articulate some of the rationale here. I mean, it looks like most of them, the short-term fee sticks out because that one is obviously below our West Coast partners, but much higher than other folks in the region. So I want you to speak to that. The others seem pretty, single-family license is kind of right in the zone there. It doesn't seem, you're proposing a $5 increase there, it looks like. And then the multifamily is a, $48 increase, but on par with, still lower than DC and Tacoma Park and Rockville, so like right in the zone. The only one that looks dramatically higher and not in comparison is the short-term rental, so maybe just speak to philosophy overall and that one specifically.
Sure, happy to do so. So our rationale was going along with, as Anita mentioned, Miss Arete mentioned, I kind of misspoke a little when I said we're moving toward. It's that we're trying to implement one. It just takes time with OMB and us working together. And in that vein, the county executive had asked us, since we're adding these 5 positions in order to implement the actual administration of the short-term rental law, what would it actually cost to do it? And so that's exactly how the number came up. To put it in context, we did some research on the short-term rental sites, the usual things ones that everybody thinks of, and single room in a household rentals were kind of the low in the county, was around $60 a night, and then at the top was renting an entire house. The kind of top of those, without getting really extravagant, was like $360 something. And
But
so
the price to the consumer.
per night, yeah, price to the consumer per night. And so it would be, I'm not sure exactly what the taxes and fees are on that, but for like a house, it's more like 1.5 to 2 nights to generate the revenue to pay for your annual licensing fee. For renting a single room, that it's a low end of $60, it would be 68, like a little over 8 nights to generate enough to pay for your annual fee. And so, you're breaking even pretty quick. And then the rest is, like whatever the cost you have of doing laundry and cleaning supplies and things like that. And so we, based on the nightly rental fees and, like how often many folks rent those rooms or whole houses or whole apartments out, we figured it would not impinge too much on anybody doing that. If somebody were getting on one of these sites and only renting their room out 2 or 3 nights a year, it probably is not worth it for them to even go through doing that. And so maybe I'm missing part of the market, but it seems like that for folks that are regularly doing this, they're doing it as a supplemental source of income, or they're doing it as a full-time business because they may have like a whole apartment or a whole, like thing to do this. And so it doesn't seem to us that it impinges too much on people's business model in doing this.
So it sounds like, so two reasons. One, you wanted to cover the cost because you're moving to an enterprise. We're studying that. I agree with that. That would be ideal, obviously, for everybody. And these numbers achieved got you to that point. And the reason for the short-term rental increase being the largest, because the others are pretty comparable, or not that much of an increase or comparable to neighboring jurisdictions, is because you did the research on what the cost to actually rent one of these, and you either recover your yearly one-time fee between a day or a couple days and a week-ish, and you thought that to be reasonable. Okay. Well, if I could, I know, Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez, and I heard your opinion. I think this one's, like the other ones are very reasonable. Like, I don't know if we should, I think we should just approve those.
So I would be comfortable, I appreciate where you're coming from on that. I would be comfortable, because not all of these are created equally, for sure, in terms of the huge increases. So for the single family, the condominium, and the ADU, which are only going up $5, $3, and $3 respectively, I'd be comfortable approving those. It's the huge increases that I am particularly concerned about. So if we want to then,
Well, yeah, let me.
multifamily and short-term would be what we're talking about.
Yeah, so I agree. I'll take agree on the ones that are a couple dollars. I think that's reasonable. Again, I'm still, the multifamily is going up $48. And, I don't see that as a huge, and it's still, when you look at the comparison, it still has us being, Rockville's the same at 100. District Columbia's 120 and Tacoma Park's 128. So we're still not the highest. We're right in the middle. So I would you all be okay with that one as well?
I'll be okay with that.
With multifamily?
Yeah.
I'm not okay with that.
Okay.
I mean, it's doubling. I mean, just to be clear, it's per unit. It's not per building. It's per unit. So if you have a 250 unit facility, I mean, this is a huge increase to rental housing costs. Just to be clear, it's generating $4 million from rental units all in 1 year. When we have previously done increases to rental fees, we've done ones that look like the other ones, $5, $3, sometimes $10. I don't think we have ever even fathomed a rental fee increase that is anywhere remotely close in the realm of the universe of a 90+% year-over-year increase. So I am not, no, it's 92%.
Oh, yeah, $48, excuse me.
Yeah, the increase is, yeah. So I am definitely not comfortable with that. I'd prefer to phase it in over 3 years personally, but if colleagues wanted to do 2 years, I could live with that.
Do you want to speak to that too? Because you didn't really speak to that one. So to me, so it's $4 million a year and you're based.
Over 80-some thousand units.
Yeah, over 80,000 units.
I mean, that's the number of multifamily. We
Yeah.
have, if you look at single family, we have multi plus single family, we have 130.
Right, yeah, we're just talking about the multifamily right now. So, just to get the scale and scope, 3.8 million over 80,000 units, that's spread pretty wide. I mean, it's not so, and I think, again, the context is that's already happening in Rockville. It's more in DC and it's more in Tacoma Park. So it's not like it's like out of the range, like the short-term rental,
Yeah,
Yeah. So
on top of the property tax increase, on top of, I mean, there are a lot of additional costs.
I understand.
And this is it is a huge increase that is unprecedented.
Okay.
So it's a question of comfort level.
Well, and if you could just respond to, the rationale, you gave the rationale for the short-term lease, which I appreciated. Could you talk to the rationale here? And assuming you think it's reasonable, otherwise you wouldn't have proposed it.
Right, so the rationale for this is similar, two fronts. Well, different in what we're kind of middle of the pack here. And, you know, we are a very low multifamily licensing fee compared to other jurisdictions. And so with the enterprise fund in mind, we have been charging the general fund for these staffing services and, you know, significantly undercharging for these services. So this puts us more in line with what landlords within municipalities in our own county and surrounding counties and the District of Columbia are paying. You know, for a four-family flat, this is $188 a year. You know, for a 1,000-unit apartment building, that's an additional $48,000 a year. But if you think that, you know, that 1,000-unit apartment is probably an average of $2,000 a unit. You know, it's and another factor in this is we are asking for additional staff in order to have to deal with the volume of the work. And if we don't increase fees, then we either would be requesting additional money from the general fund, and I know it's a difficult year. I know it was a difficult year for.
I don't think any of us want that.
Yeah, or the other option would be not to get the staffing and, you know, have the same problem.
Just to clarify, it's not an enterprise fund, so that's not really the choice that's before us. Whether the positions are approved or not, the fee, whatever the fees are, and the money goes into the general fund. So
until the enterprise fund is set up.
Yeah, so that, I mean, that's part of my point here too, is like, this is a little bit of putting the cart before the horse. It's easier to justify, we're going to charge you for the cost of implementation when we actually are charging for the cost of implementation. Right now, we're not doing that. We're theoretically moving in the direction of starting to do that. So, you know.
All right, so I just want to let you finish. Was that the rationale?
Yeah, and I'm happy to, you know, answer it.
Yeah, I mean, so just to my colleagues, then, I mean, you want to go $75 and then $100 the next year? I mean, does that make you?
Yeah, I think we should phase it in over
on that
2 or
one?
3 years. Yeah.
Okay,
I'm okay with that.
let's do 2.
All right, 2 years phase in. All right, I'll take that and make it unanimous. All right, so we'll split the baby on both of those, and you know, with the thought process that it's a phased in approach, and we'll describe it that way. I think we should notify and, you know, do outreach to explain that is the you know, the anticipation that, you know, phase in, so that people can get ready for that. And so that would be $175 increase for short-term rentals. It's still a huge increase. And it would be a $24 increase. So it would take that to $76.
Okay, sold.
Okay? All right.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right, let's, I think that is all for the department's budget.
We still have the Housing Initiative Fund?
Yeah, no, well, that's separate from the department's budget, so we're going to move on to the Housing Initiative Fund.
Okay, perfect. Turning to packet 5 and 6, consolidated packet. The HIF budget for FY25 is effectively a same services budget. There are a number of changes on the revenue expenditure side. There is one new position being requested as an enhancement. This is a position relating to essentially servicing loan agreements that are made through the CIP and the HIF to developers. Given the expansion of these programs, such as the Nonprofit Preservation Fund, DHCA is requesting that one additional staff. There's currently one person that's fully dedicated to servicing the loans. Let me see if I can find the right. There we go. There it is, asset management. So this would be adding a second position to service those loans. Going to the rest of the HIF really quickly, there are, of course, revenue declines on the recordation tax side that funds rental assistance programs. Turn your attention to page 6. Starting from page 6, the recordation tax is decreasing by about $992,000 versus FY20 approved. The HHS committee this past Monday reviewed the impacts on the HHS and HOC programs for rental assistance. The executive and the representatives from those departments stated that they can manage with those decreases. It is a 4% decrease to their programs versus FY24 approved. On the revenue side as well, the transfer from the general fund that goes to the HIF is increasing by $417,000. This again is based on a 2.5% average funding level of property taxes collected on the general fund. The debt service, the transfer to the debt service fund, starting on page 7, that is being adjusted to reflect essentially delays in the housing production fund loans, which is reducing the amount of debt service we need to pay in the coming year. Land sale proceeds, there are no land sale proceeds estimated in FY25 at this time. HOC's contribution to the HIF, which is the interest payments that are collected off from HPF loans. That, again, because of delays in issuances of loans, is being reduced on the revenue side by about $1.2 million from FY24 approved level. There's a statement from HOC staff starting on the bottom of page 7, exactly which projects are being impacted, namely Hillendale Gateway. The closing for that has been slightly shifted. On the expenditure side on the HIF, starting on page 8, again, personal costs I've mentioned are increasing due to the addition of 1 FTE, as well as compensation agreements for FY25 and 24. Operating expenses are negligible. The expenditures for rental assistance programs I mentioned before are going down $992,000. I will flag on the DHCA programs for rental assistance, there are some changes within those programs resulting in an overall increase of $851,000, whereas the decrease is being taken from the contingency line. So on page 9, you'll see sections 3 and 4 talking about those programmatic changes within the DHCA administered programs. Notably, the MPD extension programs, which were increased in funding last year in 24, is being decreased. And perhaps Dr. Bruton can talk about that in more detail, but that's essentially some shifts among programs.
I want to just briefly summarize the
I'll defer
changes there.
to Ms. Salem.
We want to give you a chance to talk about good news, so.
So basically, the funding recommended into HIF did not really change that much as Ms. Mia summarized. And the one big difference is the one additional FTE that is needed to make sure we have adequate capacity to address the increasing loan portfolios, assuming that, the additional housing funding that has been approved by the council, just for all the housing CIP, in addition to the nonprofit preservation funds. So current staff is, manage more than over 200, different kind of housing loan plus, different time. And so we want to make sure that we are doing the adequate, monitoring and make sure we, all the financing transaction, the loan payment, there's no delinquency, just a lot of detail that we want to make sure that it's really able to collect those kind of payment, and then we'll be coming back to the HIF fund and to support the future housing project. And so that really on the expenditure side, this is the major changes. On the revenue side, as Mr. Mia explained, because the recognition tax premium based on the updated revenue estimate has decreased by approximately 4%. So the way the budget allocation that impact on about 3 entities that, rely on this specific funding source to provide the rental subsidies, we'll take on a little bit, a reduction for FY25. But, we'll be working closely with OMB and the finance, over the next fiscal year, continue to monitoring, whether any kind of additional revenue is coming, out of this funding stream. If necessary, we will just, make sure there's no any additional issue, impact on either DHHS or HOC.
And there's a RAP contingency as well to try to offset some of the volatility.
Correct.
So we do just as we discussed this, it's in the packet, but included, just so everybody understands, there are contingencies taken because we do understand that this is a funding source that is extremely volatile, probably our most volatile funding source, actually.
Right. In addition, like our multifamily team, they are, work diligently with the developer to close any kind of housing project, make sure we achieve the additional affordable housing, creation preservation. We might need to put additional resources in here into like a rental agreement and all that kind of stuff. So that contingency sort of give us some cushion for us to address those kind of additional needs. But our job is continue to monitor it throughout the year.
Great. Okay. So just to clarify, the additional FTE position, that is not tax supported.
Correct. It's HIF funded.
And so just to clarify, since, so it's clear to everybody, that means that it does not have to be included on the new and enhanced programs list because that's for tax supported ones that would be competing against other general fund tax supported issues and initiatives. So I think there is significant support for that. I'll just, again, express my appreciation. I have been working on the Nonprofit Preservation Fund for a long time. That's one of the reasons why that new position will be needed, and that has just been a really good partnership. It took us a while to get there, I will note, but really appreciate Director Bruton, you in particular, for all of your work and for the collaboration working with partners at HOC, especially our nonprofit partners, to understand what was needed to make this a successful program, and I'm really excited to see what we can do with it. I think it's going to be among the most meaningful preservation initiatives anywhere in the country, and I think we're going to start talking about that fund in the same way that people are starting to talk about the Housing Production Fund. So really excited. I think those two side by side really reflect the direction that we are going in as a county, and while we don't always agree with everything between the council and the executive, those have been a real area of collaboration and coordination to address our housing needs. So thank you to that, and thank you to colleagues for your significant support and for working on it over the last several years. Councilmember Jawando has been involved from the prior committee on the Fed committee, and Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez has been advocating at the state for a housing production fund, and increase in support for that, and there are opportunities to move forward on that as well. So with that, I don't think there are any changes to the proposal for the Housing Initiative Fund from colleagues. So we are ready to move on.
Perfect. Okay. Now we'll turn to the CIP projects that are outstanding. First up is the Affordable Housing Acquisition and Preservation CIP, the traditional CIP program that funds affordable housing loans. In January, the CE recommended a $50 million addition of one-time current revenue to FY25 to support and increase this program. In his March amendments, the CE added an additional $15 million of funding in FY25 for a total increase of $65 million in just FY25. There are increases in FY29 and 30, which is the addition of 2 additional years to the CIP, but really the new funding above the ongoing level is $65 million. Staff is recommending approval as submitted. I will note that this is subject to every other CIP project in the reconciliation process. We may look at this again to see if we need any adjustments. So that will be explored as we move through the budget development process. And that goes through for all of these CIP projects at this point. But staff is recommending approval of that. So I'll stop there and see if there's any questions.
We agree. Without objection, we will move that forward.
Okay. Turning to the Revitalization for Troubled and Distressed COC CIP, we had a substantive discussion on the 26th. We deferred the recommendation at that time since we wanted to see what additional personnel support would be needed in the operating budget. We now know that CE is recommending a HIF-funded loan administrator as well as a program manager 2 in the COC program. Again, staff is recommending approval as is, subject to reconciliation.
Without objection, we enthusiastically agree.
And then the CE is recommending an amendment to the Countywide Façade Easement program. He's essentially shifting $500,000 of state aid that was programmed in FY24 to a new project, the White Oak Commercial Area Improvements and Revitalization CIP, which adds an additional $3.2 million over 6 years of current revenue to this new project. So it's, they're both connected, reducing facade easement by $500K, moving into the new White Oak Commercial Improvements Project and adding another $3.2 million over the 6-year cycle into that project. $75,000 of current revenues programmed in that new project in FY25 to conduct additional facility planning. The remaining funding is for the improvements themselves.
Appreciate that. Councilmember Gelando has been a great champion in White Oak, and Councilmember Fonda Gonzalez has been a great champion of these particular revitalization projects, including those in her district, and I have been supportive as well. So we'll enthusiastically agree on that as well, and look forward to seeing that move forward. Good to see some support from the state, where we've gotten significant support, particularly on some of the East County projects and revitalization efforts that we've undertaken, which we very much are grateful for. So I think that is it.
For the decision makes, yep.
All right. Well, thank you to Mr. Mia for the exhaustive efforts with the packet. Thank you to colleagues for your thoughtfulness today. Thank you to the department for all of your work. Obviously, a lot that needs to occur here to reconcile the budget and move forward, but I think this was a good step forward, and good to see Director Bryant there in the back. I didn't see you step in. I would have acknowledged you earlier, but appreciate all of your work on this budget as well, and your team. So thank you, everybody, and we are now adjourned.